Hello, my name is Attila Domokos, and the name of this talk is What Could Possibly Go Wrong? I was advised before not to start a presentation or a talk with questions, but I'm going to ask a question or maybe a couple of them. Raise your hand if you're using Kotlin professionally. I'd like to gauge the audience a little bit. Okay, and then if you use functional programming professionally. Okay, cool. All right, so I just want to gauge the audience. All right. There's a little bit of delay here. So when I was preparing for this and other presentations, I always wanted to find a good picture that would describe me. And this picture kind of describes and tells a lot about me. I love coffee and I love Europe. This was actually taken in a fall a couple of years ago in Vienna. Vienna is one of the best cities in the world, so if you guys can make it there, just do it. But anyway, I just found the idea of getting really good espresso in the middle of a park in November amazing. So anyway, if you like coffee and you like Vienna, this is definitely the place to go. I also have 1 year of professional Haskell development, which I think is kind of rare. So I actually know, I think, more about Haskell than Kotlin. I started using Kotlin about 5 months ago, and and I've been learning Haskell and other functional concepts for about 6 years. So that's just kind of like telling you my history here. Whenever I try a new language or a new framework, what I try to do is try to build some kind of application. And this application, and I tried this in many different languages, and I think I'm going to try that as well. What you see here is an output of a curl request to GitHub's API. GitHub has a fantastic API. I really recommend using it and leverage it whenever you can. But what I try to do is I try to build an application where I call out to GitHub, I do some kind of transformation, and I save the data in a database. The reason I like this is because it's pretty predictable, and it allows me to explore many tools that a particular language uses. And especially since I know the domain really well, I know what I would expect, let's say, in Haskell, Clojure, if I knew it or if I used it, Ruby or Python, and then Kotlin as well. So what I try to do, and this talk is going to be a story of this application that I built to query GitHub's API and then save the data into the data store. So how does this application look? The initial version is pretty simple, and this is, I think, the application that I've built for 8 years in Ruby, the happy path. This is always what I did. Basically, just make sure it works, and then if something goes haywire, we'll fix it in production, the hacker way, right? So as I switched to Haskell, one thing I started learning about learning about programming is that I constantly have to expect that something could go haywire, something could go wrong. So let's take a look at how this code would look like. The application itself has 4 distinct actions. One is calling GitHub, retrieving the data basically through the API, then deserializing the data into a specific value object. I apply some business logic on top of it, and then save the data in the database. One thing that is important about these actions is that none of the functions can call each other, right? So they are absolutely independent, and they don't know anything about each other. They're just doing one little thing, and they do it pretty well. Well, that's a question. So this is what the data object looks like. It's user info. It has 4 attributes. I use Klaxon to deserialize the JSON data into this value object. And then here's the first function. Call API. Like I said, anything could happen here. There's a client.send. That's actually a pretty dangerous code there, right? But in Ruby, we just send a web request. Who cares? And then it's going to work. Yes, sometimes. And then once the response is available, we just return the body. And then look at the return type in the function declaration. It's string. So we always expect the string value to be returned. You might wonder what the API endpoint that I'm calling, and that's defined in the util package. You can see it there. The reason I wanted to do it is because this is just one example how you can override an environment variable. Deserialized data is pretty simple. I call Klaxon. By the way, all the examples are available on GitHub, so you will be able to take a look at them. And then this is the business logic, and it's stable throughout the presentation. This function will not change. The logic here, if the user has more than 20 public repos, I'm giving a gold star. Saving the user info is not really interesting for us. We know something bad could happen there, but right now we just don't worry about that. All right, so there is one function, however, that calls all these 4 different functions as an organizer. It knows about what is the right order for these functions, and it's called getUserInfo. The first step in this workflow is calling the call API function. It returns API data. Remember, this is still a string, a nullable string. And then if it's null, it returns, it immediately quits. And then if it's not, it tries to deserialize that data that it received, adds the star rating, which is pretty simple, and then saves the user info. Let's see how this works. So this is the happy path, right? This is my user account, calling GitHub, and then getting back a gold star because I have 73 public repos. I did get permission from my little one, my son, who has a GitHub account. He only has 2 public repos, so he doesn't get a gold star. All right, what happens when I'm trying a user account that doesn't exist? Ooh, I'm getting an exception. It's kind of hard to see. Can I ask you to turn off the light here, at least in the front? Thank you. Beautiful. Can you guys see it better? Yes. Excellent. So maybe it's hard to read from the back, but it's a Kotlin exception. Remember, this was basically an incorrect user account, right? However, the application failed somewhere where it tried to deserialize that data. Absolutely the wrong spot. And this just reminds me of Ruby so much, how we did programming there, because somewhere a null happened, and it just bubbled, and we spent half a day basically trying to figure out where that null happened. If you remember, you know, the $1 trillion mistake of inventing nulls. Quoting someone, obviously. And then at the very, I'm getting the exception, and at the very end, I'm getting a null value. Very useful. I love that. And then let's try the last example that I have here in this section is trying without HTTP connection, and I'm getting a beautiful HTTP error, Java.NET HTTP error. All right, could we do something better? We could. Arrow. Are you familiar with Arrow? Sorry, that was the last question I wanted to ask you. Has anybody used Arrow? Some of you, okay. So let me tell you a couple of words about Arrow. I didn't know anything about Arrow up until I started here, and then I started here, and then one of our team members said, like, "Have you looked at Arrow?" I'm like, "No, they have options in either." I'm like, holy cow, that's my language. Let me check it out. So I started immediately digging in, and that's how basically I recognized that all the patterns that I'm used to in Haskell are present in Arrow. Arrow is, I think, 0.11. I think 11 is coming out.
Yeah, it's a new snapshot they've got.
Pretty soon. It's still not 1.0, so they are still polishing it up, but we do use it in production. So we definitely have some production asynchronous pipelines that we use, but we leverage Arrow. All right, so Arrow, the basic package that you need to add, there are multiple libraries that you need to include if you want to use Arrow, but the Arrow core package offers these generic data types that I'm going to be talking about. So option. Option is like maybe in Haskell, and in Haskell, maybe is a very, very important and basic data type. Option has 2 values. It has some or none. It's very similar to nullable, right? In fact, you could almost think of why do they need option? when they can use nullable? Well, they implement a couple of type classes, which is going to be very helpful, as you will see it shortly. But anyway, it's similar to that. It has 2 options, none and some. All right, let's refactor this application. I'm going to go through the functions again. I'm changing that string value that it returned to an option. And the way I'm doing it is that if I'm getting a 404, I'm returning none. And then if it's anything else, remember it could be 500 as well, I'm returning the response body. So this is not perfect, but hopefully it's actually going in the right direction. All right, the next function is visualizing the data. I tried to do that. I tried to change that from user info nullable to option user info. And then option provides this helper extension method called from nullable, and that converts that nullable to an option some value. Again, add star rating is not changing. If you look at the function signature, it takes a user info and it returns a user info. Save user info is going to be changed just by using a different data access function, which is option save record. So remember, there is no more, in the function signatures, there is no more nullable user info anymore. All right, let's see how our get user info, which is again the brain of this application, right? This knows about the order of execution of the functions. It's basically the pipeline description. Let's see how this has to be refactored. So if I go with, we need to change the nullable user info to something else, and this is the most trivial version that would work. We call API, we get a maybe API data back. By the way, the examples here does not have type declarations. If you use IntelliJ, it gives you a nice, a nice hint what the maybe API data it is. I'll tell you it's basically an option username in this case. Then I do a conditional there. So if maybe API data is none, I'm returning the none value, which is basically the value that I received. If it's some, I'm returning the value that I have in this that I have in this API data, in the maybe API data. And then that's the API data that it gets assigned to, and then goes to the next step, which is deserializing the data, and then user info is doing the similar conditional. At the very end, applying the star rating. Remember, that has user info to user info as far as function signature goes. There's nothing magical there. And at the very end, just saving the user info in the database. This looks pretty good, but I think it could be refactored, and it can be. So I'm going to try to remove that conditional and use a map function there. And let's just leave it at that. Basically, this map function is going to short circuit that calculation. If it's none, it's just going to quit. And if it's value, it's going to apply that operation. And then I'm going to save that user info. I'm going to call the save user info function with that updated user info. However, I cannot do that because there's a type mismatch. It requires user info, which is the data value, the data class, sorry, without the option context. And then I cannot invoke it. So if I try to map, try to use the map function just like I used it above, I'm getting another error, which means that I have the whole thing double packaged again with this option context. So what I have to use is a flat map. And then flat map, everything is green. I don't even need to compile it. IntelliJ is beautiful and simple enough to show me that this is going to compile and it's going to work properly. So I can go ahead and start refactoring further. I don't need this variable. I can just make it shorter. Look at how much more usable it is. By the way, if you're not familiar with colon, that actually is just passing a function reference, and it invokes that. Whatever the value is coming in, it's going to invoke that function with the value going in there. I don't need a maybe user info either, so I can refactor that. So we have a little bit less code again. And then I can do the same magic with this conditional as well. I tried to use map, that didn't work. I get the double option again, context wrapper. So I had to use a flat map. Oh, but I don't need the maybe API data either, so I can get rid of that. And then, since it's only one expression, I can just use one expression body. And this is it. To me, this is beautiful. This code is beautiful because it tells so much. And it has so much knowledge about how to handle errors and exceptions that, we will get back to this slide, but this is basically the highlight of my presentation. This slide and this code. All right, so let's see how this works. So I'm going to try the happy path again with where everything I expect to work. I get the one gold star. With the other case, with 2 public repos, I don't get the gold star. Okay, this is good. This is where it gets interesting. Incorrect username. Let's see what we get. Oh, we get a none. So that's better. It's still not very informative, but it didn't blow up in our face or in my face. And then let's try the last one where I don't have HTTP connection, and I'm getting a fatal error. Obviously, I did a little bit of a try-catch wrapper around it, so that's how I received this error. So it didn't blow up anywhere else. It's more predictable. I tried to improve that code as well. So basically what you need to know, again, if I have these 4 different functions, and then that organizer function is going to look at each and every output and immediately quit if anything fails, right? There is a term for this, and you can look for it online. There are talks and presentations. I don't know if there are books around it, but it's called railway-oriented programming. And then the little dots that you see there, those are function calls. And then basically, if something goes wrong, you can see how the processing is going to the red line, where it just basically, it will never get back to the green line ever again, right? It just sends it to that sidetrack, and it's just going to go forward until the end of the until the end of the call or the call stack. Railway-oriented programming. All right, let's look at a little bit of this function a little bit more and dissect it a little bit better. So map. This is a very important function in Haskell and in Arrow as well. If you look at @rating, this is the function that I needed to use map on. If you look at the function signature, this is basically a function without context, right? So basically, there is no knowledge of option or anything else. This is just user info going in, and then user info coming out. However, my input value is an option user info, which means it's a user info wrapped in an option context, and the output is going to be that as well. I took advantage of edit.io. I gave credit to the person right here, and it's going to be in the references as well. This is the best explanation of functors, applicatives, and monads that are out there. So I highly recommend going through this post. It's really helpful for you to understand, or for everybody to understand what functors, applicatives, and monads are. But let's go through a couple of examples here. So I have a 2 number value. If I try to apply +3 function with the 2, I'm getting a 5 back. However, let's say that 2 is wrapped in some kind of context, right? In this case, it's sum, right? I don't know what it is, but it's some kind of context. If I try to apply the +3 function on it, oops, it's going to blow up. It's not going to work. I need some kind of special tool that opens up that context, pushes in that function, and then lets me apply that +3 function on that 2. And then I can do that with a map, right? So that's why I needed that map. And this is what we call a functor. Let's see how this looks in Haskell. So if I try to use the +3 with the 2, I'm getting 5 back. But if I try to use just 2, which is sum in Kotlin, I'm getting an error. But if I try to fmap +3 function on the just 2 value, I'm getting just 5 back. So it works there. I'm just trying to show you how these concepts really coming from Haskell to Kotlin via Arrow. All right, so let's see if I try to call @rating with maybe user info. Remember, maybe user info is a user info data object wrapped in some context. If I try to do that, I'm getting this error, which you can see in IntelliJ very quickly, that it requires entities user info, and I'm basically trying to invoke it with option. So I have to use a map there, and I'm just trying to reinforce it here that this is a functor operation. And then this other one is a flat map. What is that flat map? What do you guys think it's going to be? All right, let's see. So save user info. I'm just trying to extract this function for the function signature, which is going to be user info type going in, and the output of this function is going to be the same type, except it's wrapped in this option context. Same deal, just like the other case, right? The input and output argument is going to be this user info wrapped in this option context. And I think the easiest way to describe it is, imagine there is a machine that takes in a single value and then does an operation on it and then wraps it in a context, right? So in this case, let's say I built a machine that took in a number and it divided by 2, took half of it, and then wrapped it up in a context. In this case, the input is option, integer wrapped in an option. The function signature is going to be an int going in, and then option int returning. And then what's beautiful about this is that I can daisy chain them easily, right? So I can just apply, like plumbing pipes together. I can just pipe these operations and connect these operations together. That's what's so beautiful about it. So anyway, if I try to save user info with updated user info, that won't work because this function expects a user info without the context, and then there's a type mismatch, obviously. So I have to use a flat map. and then this is a monad. Monads are not scary, by the way. You just have to understand what functor is, and then what monads are, and in between there are applicatives, which I'm not going to touch on, but this is I think it's easier than everybody thinks. All right, so this is what we ended up with, and I'm super happy with it. Let's continue the journey. However, there's another type in Arrow core called either, and then what's beautiful about either compared to option is that it can return a left value and a right value as well. If something goes wrong, you can package a little bit more error context into that left value. An application can have 3 different outcomes. One is when everything is good, and the second one is when there's a possible error. This is all good cases because you expected that error, so it means that you are able to react to it, right? You know you can retry, you can log it, you can quit if you have to, but it's something that you expected with a possible error. An unexpected exception, that should never happen, but they always do, so you still have to account for them as well. This is the output that you will see from the application. When, let's say, I expected the user info save database call to fail, it's going to be a possible error. Arrow actually has, it's not something specific to Arrow, but this is where I saw the example of our algebraic data types for errors. And the reason I like this a lot is because it has nothing to do with throwable. This is just the pure types in Kotlin. And I use them really just to map any kind of error that could happen in my application. And that's the value that I'm returning in the either left position. All right, so let's see how I would change this function again. We'll go through the 4 functions, the worker functions that are simple in a way that they don't know anything about each other. So this option is going to be changed to an either, app error on the left, and then string on the right. And then if it's 404, look at how I'm returning a left value with user not found object with a little bit of an error message there. And then if everything is okay, I'm just returning a right value. By the way, what's beautiful about this function is that you can unit test it any way you want, right? And once you know it works, the organizer function, you don't even have to test it much, right? You might have to write a couple of test cases, but I've built more and more complex examples of this, and it was just mind-blowing how I was able to build the individual worker functions and then just call them and then put them in chain and invoke them. And I really don't even test the entire pipeline. All right, let's see how we deserialize the data. So instead of returning option user info, I'm using a couple of helper functions as well. I really like the left if null value there, where I can add with a block, I can add a value, an error value there, which is user data JSON parse failed. Much more meaningful. Again, @star rating is not changing, and then the save user info is going to be changed to an either as well by using a to either, which very nicely maps from option to either. An option value to either. All right, let's see how much rewrite I have to do for my most important function, which is the brain of the entire pipeline. I have to change this option user info and then change a whole lot of things. That's it. Everything works. And the reason it does is because option and either implements the exact same type classes, and it doesn't matter to it what it deals with. It's actually just dealing with if I'm correct, higher kinded types, and then just operates on those. It doesn't matter what the actual implementation is. It knows that it's a functor, it's a monad, and it has to call it in this order. But what the underlying type is, it doesn't matter. All right, let's see how this. You haven't seen this function. This is where I'm calling the application, where I'm invoking the entire application. Get user info is the organizer function. The return value is an either. If it's left, I'm handling the failure because I'm expecting that. If it's right, I'm handling the success with hopefully a green message in the command line. And then if it's an unexpected error, it's red. Let's see how the 4 cases are going to work out. Yep, that works for me. And then it works for my little one with 2 public repos. And then let's see how it happens. What happens with incorrect user ID. Yep, I expected this error. So I could have logged it, I could have retried it, I could have acted on it basically. remember that we came from collection error at this point, right? How confusing that error was. I'm looking at this output, and I know exactly what is wrong. And then this is when I don't have HTTP connection. I'm still not handling it the best I can, but we'll see what we can do about that. All right, the last part of my presentation is I/O. So if you look at these 4 functions, there are 2 of them that are crossing I/O boundaries. And it's mind-blowing how important this is in Haskell, and it's not important in other languages. 2 functions, which is the calling the API and then save user info, these are the 2 ones that are crossing I/O boundaries.
What about the add star?
Add star rating?
Yeah.
That's not a pure function, but it's basically within the application context. It's not making any I/O call, right? When I mean I/O is that it goes out of my computer, right, and then reaches GitHub servers and comes back. And the database could happen, could be anywhere, right? But basically, these are the 2 functions that are designated that I/O kind of impure. Good question. So let's change this either return type to I/O. And then it's very easy to do in Arrow, in Kotlin with Arrow, because all we have to do is just wrap the whole thing in an I/O context. And then what it gives us as well is that it provides the option of handling the error right there, where you see it. A very important I/O, by the way, I think Matt is going to touch on that more than I will, but I/O is a deep topic. I think it would deserve its own talk by itself.
Is it part of the core Kotlin Arrow package?
I believe I/O it is, but I will have one slide which is not, which is FX, which is not going to be part of that. Anyway, I/O is really deep topic, and I really would like somebody give a talk on it, because it's just amazing how much you can do with I/O. The most important you need to remember with I/O is that everything is deferred, which is beautiful. Like nothing is executed in context. What that means is that you can treat an I/O operation just like you would treat with option or either, right? It's just basically some kind of value in a context. And you can start passing these values around. This is what's beautiful about it, right? It's just, what is it? Like, I don't know, it's a functor. It's just basically wrapped in this context, right? But you start treating effects as a context, as a value wrapped in context. So when you see this code, when the execution engine got to the point of client.send, at that point of time, it went out and sent that request. Here, nothing of that is happening, because I just didn't tell I/O, okay, execute this process. All right, so the other function that I had to change is save user info, which pushes the user info object into the database. And then changing that is going to be just as easy, and I'm handling the error similarly. However, what you need to know, and this is where it gets really, really complex, is that as soon as you start add I/O on top of it, you start introducing new layers, right? So you have user info deep inside of it, right, in your shell, and then you have either on top of it, and then I/O is another layer on top of it, right? So if you have to do any kind of operation on it, which I have to do here, right? Remember, it's not either anymore. It's I/O wrapped in either, and then that wraps my user info. I just cannot use this function. This would not work. So if I changed even the type, that wouldn't work. I have to do a whole lot more dancing to actually start opening up the boxes and then just start getting into I/O, getting into either, and getting to my value, right? So this is where it gets really, really complex. Thankfully, oh, there's one more call here. This is me new to Kotlin and Arrow. I had to call this unsafe runtime because I had to unwrap that I/O. I would know how to do this in Haskell. I couldn't figure it out in in Arrow, so I don't know what I did wrong there. But when I see this in an I/O, that is painful. I should not be seeing any kind of execution, only in the main function of my program. So this is where I'm getting into I/O, the initial I/O of calling the GitHub API. This is an additional call, and this is where basically I just have to unwrap whatever the database operation is and just flatten that result and send it back as an I/O and not I/O, right, where it's a double wrapped I/O. All right, but using IOFX makes it a whole lot cleaner, and I'm not going to talk too much about it. This is going to be a segue into Metstock. It's going to have a whole lot more context and information about that. But this is basically what allows us to much more nicely handle double-wrapped objects with double context. In this case, IO and either. All right, my operation. This is we're getting to the very end of my talk here. So the run function, which is just invoking the get user info function, you can see it on the third line. I'm calling the program with unsafe runsync. This is the only place where my application is executing when I'm using the FX. And then if everything goes good, I'm returning right. I'm actually handling the success, sorry. If there's a failure that I expect, it's a possible error, an unexpected exception is going to happen. But I'm catching that right there. And it's not a try catch, it's basically an IO handle error. All right, let's see how this works. Let's see the happy case, the happy path, which is working fine. And then what happens when there is no HTTP connection? I'm getting a beautiful left error because I'm using the IO side effect with handle error to catch that. And with that, I'd like to thank you. If you have any questions, please ask me or ask at the very end. Thank you so much, and you can see some references here.